Hi, my name is Liz Hiller with NACE, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Recruiting and Retaining Veteran Students at UTSA. We encourage you to actively participate in the chat and please post your questions in the Q&A. First, I would like to take a moment to thank Chevron, our proud sponsor for today's veteran webinar. Chevron is committed to being the employer of choice for qualified military veterans. The company recognizes service members' commitment to teamwork and safety. At Chevron, there are retired members of the military and active reservists throughout the company. Chevron is experienced in helping employees adjust to new work and living environments worldwide. Their benefits and support programs assist in the transition from military to civilian life. Veterans met important challenges during their service in the military, and Chevron applies these experiences and skills in a rewarding career with the company. Now it's my pleasure to turn it over to our presenters. First, I would like to introduce Courtney Pletcher, Senior Career Consultant for the University Career Center at UTSA. Take it away, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Liz. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk to y'all about our recruiting and retaining veterans at the University of San Antonio. My name is Courtney Pletcher, Senior Career Consultant, Career Services, and graciously joining me today. I love his joke where he said, hey, you volunteer me, like I'm voluntold, I'm doing this with Courtney. So Dr. Michael Logan, the Senior Director of Veteran and Military Affairs. So thank you so much for being with me here today and co-presenting on supporting our military affiliated students. And we're excited to share insights, how we do it, and hopefully y'all can learn and take away some things that you can apply to your institutions as well.
I'm excited to be here, despite being voluntold to share this time with Courtney. I never mind doing that. And of course, as a veteran myself, and also Courtney as a veteran, we understand the challenges that military affiliated students face. And today we're going to cover how we help them succeed. And so without further ado, let's get started with how we recruit veterans at UTSA.
All right. So session overview, before we dive into these specific details, here are some things you can expect to hear more about, learn more about today. Our overview, starting with the recruitment strategies, exploring how we retain them through community building. We find that community is super important here on campus. I think UTSA has an amazing community, especially one that is very supportive of our veterans, and how we reach specific populations like women veterans, veterans of color, and then we'll wrap up by sharing those key takeaways, some professional suggestions for institutions potentially without full resources.
Yeah, so each of these topics reflects the approach that we take at UTSA, but we're also going to offer practical steps that any campus can adopt regardless of its resources. So as we get started, things that we like to ask, and of course you can put these in the chat where the other Q&A goes, but how many of y'all are veterans? How many of y'all are family members of active duty service members or veterans? And of course, if there are any active duty veterans, reservists, or members of the Guard here with us today. So we ask that because a lot of times the question comes up about how do we define what military affiliated is, or what is a veteran? And of course, we know there's lots of challenges associated with defining that to include folks that have served on active duty, but maybe don't identify a specific way because maybe they feel I wasn't in combat, I wasn't shot at, so therefore I don't identify as a veteran. But at UTSA, up on the screen right now, this is how we define military affiliated students. So if you've been on active duty, Guard or reserves, veterans and family members plus ROTC. So we have a pretty broad definition of what military affiliated is. And of course, we recognize that within that very broad definition that there is actually a lot of diversity, which hopefully by the end of this, we will have communicated to you how we recognize that and how we support those folks specifically at UTSA. So I also wanted to briefly go over what our numbers look like. So we have a pretty large military connected population. I like to say sometimes that we have more veterans than a lot of universities have total military connected students, and this number is continuing to grow. And I'm not sure what other institutions are experiencing, but for us, we knew a year ago to expect a little bit of a bump in military connected enrollment because of PACT Act. And with the first major PACT Act deadline that passed a year ago, September, folks were starting to get presumptive ratings. And as veterans were hitting 100%, they themselves and their family members were becoming eligible for education benefits that they may not have had access to before. And so we're seeing that manifesting as a bump in enrollment, specifically in two categories, which is military family members and disabled veterans, so otherwise known as Veteran Readiness and Employment, VRE, Chapter 31. It has a lot of different names to it. But something that I think is important to recognize is, although we primarily exist to serve our student population, that we have just over 250 staff members at the university that also wore the uniform. And I think that goes a long way towards what we're going to be talking about, which is how we build and maintain community. And it's very important to recognize any kind of representative leadership or representation among the staff, and connecting those with the military connected student population, because that's only going to strengthen the total sense of community that you have wherever you are. So demographic data, we do track our students so that we know who they are and we can offer them appropriate programming, intervention, and events that they're going to meaningfully engage in. And so keep in mind, these are specific to UTSA. These aren't national numbers. And we are a Hispanic serving institution located in South Texas, and we are Research One. So the median age is 33 and a half years old. Some of y'all might have heard veterans that go into higher education talking about the Billy Madison syndrome. They feel like they're a little bit older than their peers. Well, this number bears out that they are just a little bit older than their peers. As again, I said that we're a minority serving institution, so the majority of our student veterans are not white. So they fall into categories where they're people of color. Most are, or at some point have been married. Most are, or more than half are employed. A chunk of them are first generation students. And I think if anyone really understands how the GI Bill changed higher education in the United States, that's not going to be a surprise to anybody, because the GI Bill does provide access to a lot of folks that otherwise would not have had access to higher education. And then here's an interesting thing to keep in mind, especially when you're trying to plan the timing of any kind of engagement or events, is most of our veterans live more than 10 miles from campus. And if any of y'all are familiar with San Antonio, the entire city is under construction at any given moment. And so it's important to know how far they live from campus, because if we're trying to plan like a resume workshop or any kind of event, we got to make sure that we're doing it when we know the veterans are already here on campus for class, because after you have fought all of that construction to get more than 10 miles to your place of residence, you're probably not going to feel like battling that traffic to come back for an hour-long event and then battle it one more time to go back home. So that's actually a very important piece of information to have for us to use when we're planning anything that we're doing for the military connected population. This one I throw in there just because some folks are curious where our veterans are. And I will point out that, without getting into what all those letters mean, those are the different colleges that we had at the time that this information became available. But I wanted to point out that the highest concentration we have of military connected students at UTSA is in the College of Business. And you might say, so what, Mike? Why do I need to know that? Well, it's interesting because I have been asked the question previously why we don't have more students using GI Bill to go into a STEM field, when objectively STEM degrees upon initial graduation with your undergraduate provide kind of the biggest return on investment financially. And the answer is because a lot of the veterans that are using their GI Bill to go to school, yes, they're using it because they're looking to enhance their employability and probably their quality of life through income post-graduation. But equally important to them is a sense of community. So when they're picking their majors and they're picking their kind of what they want to be when they grow up, they're thinking very much about what is it going to be like when I'm in the field and when I'm the other folks that are around me, what is the culture like? in this discipline or in a company that maybe I'm looking towards moving into post-graduation. And so those things get equal consideration when a veteran's trying to select what their major is going to be. So I could talk about why STEM is number 3, but that would be a webinar all by itself. So I'm just going to let that go right now. And we'll talk about that another time. So one of the things that we're here to talk about today is recruitment strategy. So at UTSA, we've developed some very strong recruitment strategies, starting with partnerships with Joint Base San Antonio, where we collaborate with military schoolhouses to reach active duty personnel. We also make presentations to veterans and their families at community events, explaining the benefits of using their education funding at UTSA.
And then events on campus that happen from day one, we make sure veterans are super welcome. I actually, the Career Center, we partner with student orientation services. So I'm very happy to get into a lot of the orientation classes and uh, the transfer students, 'cause a lot of veterans are transfer students too. They're transferring a lot of credit from either community colleges, or they're transferring a lot of credit that they received during their active duty time, or maybe they just transferred to San Antonio and they're looking to transfer their credits. So from day one, I let veterans know that, hey, there's a community for them. We have UTSA Day events, we have the Vet Resource Fair, and we are all about raising awareness and sharing the resources and support system available to veterans specifically. I know a lot of veterans identify as non-traditional students, so we make a point to say, like, hey, this is for you too. Like, this is not just orientation, like high school person here, young, like, so we have a lot of student organizations. We encourage them to promoting military focused activities as well, and essentially, again, just creating that community that veterans can immediately connect with, like, oh yeah, this is for me. Absolutely.
I think what's important to note also is that when we are looking at kind of what our military connected population looks like, if you think back to that slide that had the bubbles, where the family members outnumbered the veterans 2 to 1. It's important to understand that when we're serving a family member, we're actually still serving the entire family, including the veteran. A lot of times veterans are super engaged, even if they're not directly the student. And so we want to make sure that when we're putting out our recruiting efforts, that they're not just aimed at the person who we're hopefully going to get to register and enroll at our university, but also making sure that their veteran family member is comfortable, right? Because a lot of times these veterans feel like they have some kind of this is going to come across wrong, but ownership and how those benefits are used. And so they want to feel comfortable that they're sending their family member, if it's their child or their spouse, to an institution that is going to benefit them, not just academically, but I think with strong community support, and ideally that's going to provide the best return on investment for their time and the investment of those benefits. So we've talked about recruitment, so now we're going to talk a little bit about retention, because I think that's equally as important as recruitment. Once we get them here, that's great. But anybody who studied kind of the trends in higher education knows that historically there's this fall off that happens between second and third semester. So basically, your biggest matriculation, or we'll say attrition, your biggest piece of attrition or time of attrition is from first year to second year. And so we give equal attention to making sure that we're doing things to retain our students. So with recruitment only being half of the equation, retaining the military affiliated students is important, right? Because we want them to graduate, want them to be successful. So one of our most successful initiatives has been Operation Buddy Check. And that connects veterans with mentors for social support. And especially during the pandemic, this program provided much needed engagement to keep the veterans on track.
So we also partner with various resources on campus, such as that to address the financial and academic challenges, because it's not just the Center for Military Affiliated Students. Our university has a wealth of resources, financial and academically, and also we have a communication strategy to notify students when their VA benefits are running low and point them to additional resources they might not be aware of, because I know, like, sometimes we're splitting these benefits between different family members, or I know my personal use of my own benefits. I was just on the tail end of my Hazelwood Act, like during my master's, and I just barely squeaked out the last of my benefits. But it's also important to make sure that military affiliated community is empowered to know the resources available to them. So it's a smooth transition. If benefits do happen to run out, expire, they're running low, just to get them immediately connected so that they can continue on their academic and financial track successfully.
I think that's actually a really good point, because I think everybody knows that the GI Bill is finite. In most cases, you're getting 36 months. And I know very few people that have been able to complete a college degree in 36 months. And so we're constantly having to think about making sure that there are things in place to get folks across the finish line. And one thing that I'll throw in real quick as far as additional resources is when approached from external entities about scholarships. A lot of times someone will come up and they'll just say, hey, we want to support the military connected community. We'd like to be able to fund a scholarship. How can we do that? There's a lot of things to keep in mind, but the biggest thing I think that we need to talk about briefly, just so it's on your mind, is that we want to make sure that any of the scholarships that we get for military connected students are not tuition specific. And that's a lesson we learned really early on, before we understood really how tuition specific scholarships can engage with military education benefits, in that if it's tuition specific, then it goes to tuition and it's not refundable, which means that if someone actually does have, let's say, post 9/11 GI Bill that they're using, and they get a scholarship, but it's tuition specific, all that really happens is that scholarship's going to pay the tuition and relieve the federal government of their obligation to do so, but nothing goes back to the student. There's no refund. And so we've been very intentional since learning those lessons that whenever we're trying to arrange for additional resources, that we make sure that they don't conflict with any existing military education benefits. Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is benefit the military connected student, and not frustrate them, which when you get a scholarship and find out that there's no refund coming to you, that can feel pretty frustrating. So moving on to building the community on our campus. Building a strong community, I think, is key to retention. So at the heart of our efforts is the Center for Military Affiliated Students, or as we call it, CMAS, because that's a lot of words. And it's basically a one-stop hub where veterans can access everything from financial aid to academic support. We have lounges specifically for veterans. We foster peer-to-peer connections and a sense of belonging. And so one quick note is that the thing that I think makes CMAS unique is that you have other institutions where you may have these services physically co-located, but here at UTSA, they also roll up under one administrative chain of command. So what's great about that is that makes us very nimble. So if there's ever a conflict in maybe a policy or an interpretation of a policy or anything like that, we have an in-house tiebreaker, right? So when the military connected student comes to us with that issue, instead of having to send them up 3 or 4 different chains of commands for different interpretations of maybe 1 or 2 policies, it's literally a one-stop for them. We can get the team together, we can huddle, we can decide what the intervention is going to be, and that student is leaving that day with a solution to their problem.
And also celebrating our veterans' achievements with events like our graduation cord ceremony, which has become an official part of UTSA's graduation celebrations as a way to recognize veterans' unique journey and contributions. And I would like to give just a huge shout out to our Center for Military Affiliated Students in the community and the environment, the very welcoming environment that they build, because I will just very briefly share as a woman veteran. And I know we have a slide upcoming talking about women veterans and veterans, people of color, and just some, unique biases or little discriminations that we may have faced during COVID. I won't name names, but I was waiting at a VA hospital, and there were a lot of spouses in the room, and I understand social distancing, super important. I was wearing my mask and everything, and they were asking the spouses to leave the room as we're all waiting to get our blood drawn. They were like, social distancing, you have to leave. And then the person approached me and said, you need to wait for your spouse outside. And I just had to take a moment and say, I'm here for myself. And then the second time I visited during COVID, they stopped me. And I mean, on my own, I had to volunteer my ID. They didn't card anyone else. Like, they're all doing the temperature thing, enjoy, like, go to your appointment. But I felt singled out. I had to prove once again, I'm a veteran. I served in the Navy. Yes, like, it's me. I understand I look young and I don't look like a traditional veteran. I'm a Latina. And so and there are things that I just experienced as a woman veteran. I understand again, like, what does a veteran look like? But I have to give a huge shout out here to the Center for Military Affiliated Students, because when I was in my graduate program, I heard about the graduation cords, and I'm like, well, hey, I'm a veteran, and I feel like super gaslit by most places of like, why am I actually a veteran? Did I actually serve? Like, do I have to? I was like getting my ID ready to show them I'm a veteran, but I walked into the office and the front desk greeted me immediately and they were like, "Hey, how can we help you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I heard that I could get veteran cords here." And the person at the front desk opened the drawer, pulled out the folder of cords and like, "Here you go." And I was speechless. I was like, "Oh my gosh," like I cried later and I was like, "I'm trying not to cry. I'm trying not to cry." But it was so important to me. It felt so good to like not have to prove I'm a veteran. Like, wow, this like speaks volumes to our community and our environment that is so veteran friendly that a woman veteran was able to show up and there was no question if I was a veteran or not. I just said, "Hey, is this where I could like pick up veteran cords?" And they're like, "Yeah." And you just handed to me, no questions asked, no doubt of whether. Yes, I love all the hearts. Big shout out to uh Mike for the community that they have over there at CMS, because I know I'm over here at the Career Center and I think we have a really great customer service, but just it is so amazing and it is just so important to create a culture of welcoming and inclusiveness. And that is like the very definition of inclusiveness, is to walk into a place and just feel included, like to not have to explain myself, to not have to prove, to not have to show my ID that says veteran. So that just means so much to me as a minority woman veteran to work in a place and be a part of something as amazing as the environment that they create over there at CMAS.
Yeah, that's an excellent segue. So as I've said before, one of the things that we've done to make sure that we're providing the most relevant support and being as effective as we can is we study, right? We do research, we do actual research. And we did a survey for the first time pre-COVID in 2019 because we wanted to find out what factors contributed or the biggest predictors of how a veteran perceives themselves relative to the campus community in the form of sense of belonging. How do I belong in the community? And that's just because so many things, even when you're going out and you're looking at anecdotal stories like what Courtney just told us about, or even in other research, sense of belonging is a very foundational thing. If you have sense of belonging, a lot of other things fall into place. If you don't have a good sense of belonging, well, then a lot of things just don't happen the way they're supposed to. There's not a lot of buy-in, there's not a lot of engagement. So we wanted to know, all right, what are the factors that affect that for our student veterans? And so what you're looking at on your screens right now is what, after we did a literature review and we're kind of setting up the study, we said, here's what we think it looks like. We know that those other things are predictors. We know that validation is a big one, social capital, amount and quality of engagement, and of course, financial circumstances. And so military service characteristics, that's what we hypothesized. We said that is just as important as those other predictors and how they influence sense of belonging. And I could say that the sense of belonging basically is perception of being accepted, valued, included, encouraged by others, not experiencing the microaggressions that Courtney experienced. Feeling of connectedness, like knowing who the other folks are on campus. That's why it's important to also know who your employees are. So we know who our 250 faculty and staff are, and creating that sense of community. And so we were wrong, right? This was our hypothesized model. We were incorrect. This is what actually ended up happening. So we conduct the study. We get a super high response rate. So I think we had like a 54% response rate to this survey, and we didn't sample, right? We surveyed the entire student vet population. And what we got back was that military service did not line up as an equal predictor for sense of belonging. What actually happened is military service was the lens through which all of the other components were filtered through as a service member. So the validation was there as important as an important predictor. Mentorship, social capital, engagement to include amount of engagement and quality of engagement, and then some general things that kind of rolled up into the category of support. And so when we were first looking at those results, we thought, what, military service isn't important? And as we did a deeper dive into the numbers, because this was a quantitative study, it became very clear, no, military service is the most important because it is kind of just the context that all these things exist in. And that goes beyond just those predictors. We've done some other things where we've had some graduate student veterans that have done deeper dives into the data, looking at, does this change if you slice it by gender or ethnicity or any of those other things? And there are some very slight variations, but every single way that you slice the data, it comes back that military service is an important lens that we experience our intersectionality through. And so you might ask yourself, so what, Mike? What does that mean? Why do you keep saying that? Well, the revelation here is that we inadvertently created a quantitative model that empirically proves that military service is a culture. So when you're talking about the lens through which you experience all these other components, that's the definition of a culture, right? You have a kind of a shared experience that influences how you see things, perceive things, believe things, your reality. And so that was a very, very happy accident to steal that from Bob Ross. Is that we have an actual empirical model so that whenever we're trying to advocate for programming, engagement, or resources up the chain of command, and we might run into somebody who says, hey, we already offer this thing for maybe, LGBTQ students, why would we do it for veterans? Well, we whip this bad boy out and we say, well, because these veterans and these military connected students see themselves as a unique culture, and if they don't feel that this intervention or this program that you have in place is for them, they're not going to engage with it. So you have to recognize and respect them as an individual culture and offer it through that context if you want any kind of meaningful engagement um, and sustainability. Because right, you can have the best program with all the funding in the world, but if nobody participates in it, it's probably not going to last very long. So that was a very important result, unintended result from the study we did in 2019, and we've recreated that survey for subsequent cohorts of student veterans that have come through the university, and there's very, very little variation in those results. So every subsequent version of that study shows that the concept of military service or veteran being a culture is real. And of course, there's some interesting little things. If you want to nerd out, we can do that offline. But things that when you go into a deeper dive, looking at ethnicity and gender and things like that, you can see some differences and maybe how those predictors of sense of belonging load. But they're pretty consistent. So I'll leave that there because I know that's not what this particular presentation is about. So I will move on from that model. But of course, happy to share that with anyone if y'all want to reach out to me at any point, and we can dive deeper into that kind of data. But back to you, Courtney.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of these important elements of our veteran culture, and focusing a little more on our support systems for veterans for academic and career services. Like Mike is saying, is the importance of tailoring these services academically and career-wise for veterans transitioning to civilian life, because the approach to providing services for veterans is going to look much different than traditional students. A lot of veterans, myself included, we go through the TAPS class or the TGPS class, whatever they call it nowadays. But it's a lot of information. And then there's maybe like a 30-minute PowerPoint on like, well, and here's a resume and make sure it's federal because that's where you're going to work afterwards. But I mean, with a lot of students who say, that it wasn't helpful. And I was like, it's a lot of information. Like, I'll say maybe it was good, maybe it was a bad presentation. So, when I tailor these services to veterans, it's a lot of gaining perspective on their transferable skills. I'll meet with for example, I had a cybersecurity student in the College of Business come and sit down with me, and they're like, I don't qualify at all. I was just a combat veteran. And I was like, excuse me, you were just a combat veteran? Do you know how well you work under pressure, teamwork, collaboration, leadership? I'm sure you had collateral duties. I was like, there is so much we can focus on here that you're going to be overqualified by the time we're done transferring your skills. I know with cybersecurity, we got to get those like SET plus, there are those certifications we need to qualify for a lot of jobs, but there's so much in gaining perspective and transferring their skill set. And I know that even my own background, like I actually did come from Intel, and I don't do that now, but I focused a lot on transferable skills that I feel empower me from being an analyst to problem solving now. So for veterans when they feel like I'm starting over from zero. And I was like, you are absolutely not. You have a wealth of experience that we are going to leverage. I can't speak for every employer, but most employers love veterans, and it's all about how you market yourself. So that's where, offering these specific workshops for veterans, career fairs, one-on-one advising specifically for veterans. So it is a certain approach that I recommend for supporting veterans rather than just, yep, I'll review your resume. It's gaining perspective. It's building confidence in their transferable skills from their military experience and how it applies to what career they're pursuing.
One thing that I'll say that Courtney didn't is that Courtney has worked with CMAS previously on a project where we tried this thing where we wanted to do a resume workshop that was not a traditional resume workshop. So in other words, we're not here to help teach you how to write or put something on paper and give kind of a recited, rehearsed response to an interview question. And instead, we asked the students to think about what the person was trying to learn about them. So instead of focusing on how do I answer this question or what do I articulate on my resume, it forced them to be a little more reflective and think about what is it that they want to know about me, and what information are they trying to get at through these questions? How do I read between the lines so that the answer I provide is really getting at the spirit of what it is they're trying to learn about me versus just giving a very technical answer, because veterans are really good about giving a technical answer when asked a direct question. But like with everyone else, and this is true for everybody, reflection is a difficult thing to do. But for veterans, it's almost a reprogramming that we had to do. And so Courtney partnered up with our department in creating, and I think it was like an 8-week long evolution, right? Because you can't teach someone or retrain them to be reflective in a day or in an hour-long seminar. And from that very first time that Courtney did that, we've grown that program into something called the Power Program, that now has external sponsor, and it's treated like it's almost like a paid internship. And as a condition of being on that paid internship, you have to go through this professional development syllabus that includes that component that Courtney helped develop early on, which is learning how to be reflective so that you can better answer questions that talk about your transferable skills in a meaningful way, instead of just a very technical, dry answer that we tend to come out of active duty with. So, but getting back to what we're talking about, financial support is critical too, right? Because money kind of makes everything happen. So our team helps veterans navigate the GI Bill in all of its versions, which can be complex depending on how it interacts with other things. And specifically in Texas, the Hazelwood exemption. I know different states have different versions of a state kind of veteran education benefit, or some don't. But for us, we manage both of those, both federal and state. And of course, a few years back when Congress changed the law for those that had used Chapter 31 veteran readiness and employment, and they grandfathered back post 9/11 GI Bill months. And so then it was trying to let veterans know, hey, you actually have like a year or two of eligibility that you thought you didn't have because the law just changed. And so we also maintain close relationships with state and federal lawmakers so that we're well aware of changes that are either coming or proposed and are likely to pass, and stuff that just passed and maybe we didn't know about it until it passed, but making sure that we know about it so that we're providing the best information, so that our student veterans and their family members are able to use all of the financial resources that are available to them, because that changes sometimes from day to day. We also connect them to mental health services. We ourselves are not counselors. We are not mental health professionals. You probably don't want someone like me doing that anyway. And so that's why we maintain relationships with folks that do that very well. We also maintain an escalation matrix so that if we do have someone that is experiencing crisis, that we kind of have an established protocol, and we make sure that we've got the appropriate folks on speed dial, depending on what the situation is, to be able to refer them that way. So providing access to veteran specific counseling through partnerships, sometimes with the VA, sometimes through campus counseling, sometimes with nonprofits. It just depends on what the situation is and what the availability is and how acute the need is to get this handled right now. So moving on, make sure, there we are. So reaching and supporting women veterans and veterans of color. This one's important because there's a perception out there that veteran culture is very dude bro, right? That's what we say. I mean, that's not the technical term, but that's what we say. And veterans are definitely not compliant with the Top Gun volleyball scene. That is just not who we are, especially in higher education. More proportionately, more women veterans than male veterans are actually using their GI Bill benefits, because on active duty you've got, depending on what's going on, somewhere between like 12 and 15% of the active duty force are women. But I think this is kind of consistent across the country. You've got 24, 25, 26% of your GI Bill users being women veterans. So again, proportionately speaking, there are far more women veterans using GI Bill benefits than maybe are on the total population on active duty. So we have to be mindful of who our population is and making sure that um, we're being as inclusive as we can be. And our top priority is ensuring that we reach all veteran populations, including women veterans and veterans of color, and that we know that these groups face unique challenges. And so we've developed targeted outreach and programming to meet their needs.
Inclusivity is key, and by collaborating with our community organizations and veteran groups, we do ensure that all veterans have access to the resources they need. And this approach also ensures that we're fostering a truly supportive and diverse campus community.
So we couldn't achieve this without partnerships, both on and off campus. So we collaborate with various departments, including career services, the ROTC programs, our counseling center, and all of that's to ensure that the veterans have the support they need in whatever form that's going to come in.
So we also have external organizations that we partner with, such as the Veteran Wellness Alliance or Student Veterans of America. And these partnerships extend our reach and allow us to offer even more comprehensive support for our veteran students.
Yeah, we recognize that we're not the best at everything, so we find out who is and we partner with them to make sure that our students have the access to the best possible service, support, and care that they can. All right. So ongoing research and data. I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier when I was nerding out on y'all. So our approach clearly is data driven, and we continuously assess veteran retention and graduation rates. And this feedback informs the programs that we develop. So recently, we secured $5.5 million in federal funding to build a new state-of-the-art veteran center on campus, ensuring that even more of the resources are available in the future. And large swaths of that funding that we applied for were for accessibility, because that's something that we hear feedback from the veterans a lot, is just how convenient is it to get from the parking spot to the place that I need to get the support that I need to get. And things that folks don't think about very often, like what kind of door is there to the office? Is there a door that I have to pull and it's kind of heavy? And if there's mobility issues or stability issues, is the person capable of pulling that door open and still being able to balance themselves and walk through it, versus us having kind of a sliding door with a sensor that works, and making sure that there's just those little things are thought of and are not barriers or obstacles to folks accessing us. Also thinking about things like infrastructure. Is our website fully ADA compliant? If there's people with visual or audio impairments, are they going to be able to access the information that's available on the website? And so actually the majority of that funding goes towards things like accessibility, infrastructure improvement, and having the right equipment available, so that even if we wanted to provide a spot for a veteran to do a telehealth appointment on campus without having to go somewhere else to do it, do we have the technology and the reliable internet infrastructure so that they can actually do that? And then of course the smallest piece of that goes towards actually knocking down walls and putting up other walls. So that's just something that I wanted to put out there, because it was several years in the making and required a lot of collaboration internally and externally to kind of think about all the different things that we needed to do to make sure that we were addressing all of the concerns that had come up over the years, that student veterans had been bringing to our attention, putting it all into one proposal, and trying to knock it out with one piece of funding and making it as meaningful as we can, because it's not something that happens regularly that we get access to that kind of a grant. And so we really had to be very intentional about covering as many things as we could with that one piece of funding that we may never see again. So.
All right.
Good one, yeah.
So we often use the analogy of student athletes to describe the needs of veteran students. So just like athletes, veterans bring unique skills that also face challenges that require specialized support systems.
So for institutions without extensive veteran resources, starting small can make a big impact. A lot of folks will ask, I'm a one-person shop, or I'm 90 minutes away from the closest vet center or VA institution. And so focusing on building peer mentoring programs or creating a dedicated space for veterans and leveraging community partnerships to get started is low-hanging fruit. And so the athlete veteran analogy, I like this one because regardless of how big or small the institution is or how urban or remote the institution is, there's probably an athletics program somewhere on that campus. And something that I think we don't think about, but is absolutely true, is there's a lot of similarities between an athlete that has spent a significant amount of time with that certain identity. They wear a uniform, right? They go to practice, they're around the team, they've got coaches. They kind of live this life from day to day, and then one day they're not eligible anymore. They've either graduated or they've just run out of eligibility, and now all of a sudden they're stuck in this having to figure out who am I now? I've spent the longest time, everything I've done has been towards making me a successful athlete. Even I have tutors to make sure that I keep my eligibility to be able to play. And then once they transition out of that, they experience a lot of the same loss of identity, loss of purpose, things that people transitioning off of active duty experience. And so if you do have an athletics program, regardless of the sport, it might be worth exploring a partnership with your athletics program, so that if you can connect with alums of whatever that athletics program is, and have them provide a form of mentorship or peer mentorship to veterans that are transitioning off of active duty and into your school, there's going to be a lot of relatability there. And again, if you're not surrounded by resources, you have that resource there on your campus that you probably don't even realize is an appropriate resource that can be doing things to help you, especially if you have very limited staffing or very limited program funding. And a lot of these athletes that have transitioned out of their athletic identity, they're also looking for a sense of purpose. So being able to function as mentors for transitioning service members, you're killing two birds with one stone. You're giving those folks kind of a transitional sense of purpose as they figure out what their post-athletic identity is going to be, while they're also providing a service to the transitioning service members that are coming into the higher education environment. So we're getting towards the end of this, which is great. So we won't be talking at you too much longer. Some key takeaways for institutions without full resources. If you're just getting started, our advice is to focus on high impact areas. So establishing a veteran task force or a committee, starting with a few key initiatives like career mentoring or creating a dedicated veteran space.
And partnering with local organizations, these partnerships can supplement what you're able to offer and help extend your reach.
Feel like we just said that. Yep, we did. So in the end, right, one thing that I said that I think is an important point is if you don't know where to go, you don't know where to start, you have limited resources, target the biggest impact that you can have. Look internally first to things that maybe you can organize that don't cost any money, like having a veteran council. Before our office stood up, and we're relatively young, the Center for Military Affiliated Students didn't come into existence until 2018. Prior to that, the university had a Veteran Services Advisory Council, which was kind of the precursor to creating the one stop that we have now for all of the veteran services. And even to this day, we maintain an advisory board, because again, as much as I'd like to think that I'm a wise person, that I'm a veteran, I've made all the mistakes that every veteran has. I've had chronic pain and bad credit, at least one divorce, all those things. My transition experience was 20 years ago, or at this point, more than 20 years ago. And we know that the needs change with each successive cohort of veterans that are coming off of active duty. So in order to stay relevant, you have to be willing to adapt and meet veterans where they are instead of being prescriptive. So I might think, hey, this is what I needed when I got out of active duty in 2003, and it may be absolutely irrelevant to somebody coming off of active duty in 2024. And so I have to be able to kind of put my own experience a second and be willing to constantly reevaluate relevancy and literally meet the veterans where they are. That's probably the most important thing. And you heard me mention it once before. You can have a very well funded program, a very well thought out program, but if the program was not based on measurable needs from your veterans, do not expect a whole lot of engagement. Which, of course, if you're trying to go after money and resources to sustain your programming, that gets difficult if you can't show that you're having a big impact. So it's very, very, very important to be able to be reactive and not prescriptive when it comes to veteran support. And so to conclude, UTSA's model focuses on comprehensive support from recruitment to retention to building a strong community and partnerships. And we hope you've gained some insights today, and we'd be happy to take any questions you may have.
Yes, we thank you so much for your time. We hope that this webinar information has encouraged and empowered you in some way to better support veterans, and we look forward to discussing how your institution can adopt similar strategies to support military-affiliated students. We do have some questions in the Q&A. Someone is asking if you will make the survey questions instructions available.
I can, sure. If I'm not sure how to distribute those, but I can definitely do that. We what we've done with the survey questions and the data is I am not a faculty researcher and I don't use it necessarily to go after grant money, and so I'm not super protective over the data. It's basically institutional data. And so over the years, what I've done is I've made it available to veterans that are typically in graduate programs that want to research it and do maybe a class project or they want to go to grad school or they're trying to get into a doc program, so they want to write a publishable article. And so I do make that information available to whoever wants it. So
Michael, whenever you send me a copy of the slide deck, you can just send it to me and I can add it into their MyNace account.
Okay, not a problem. I'll
Perfect.
send the most recent version. You don't want the 2019 version because we hadn't validated it yet, and that has 156 questions. You want the one after we validated it that has like 30 questions on it, because good luck getting folks to answer 156 questions.
I know there's a couple questions if these would be made available, and it does look like you'll be able to access the slide deck and the recording in the MyNace account tomorrow. So for everyone that asked, I do see the instructions here for everyone to be able to access the slides, the recording, this information. There is another question here I see. You mentioned being a one-stop shop. Mike, do you invite colleagues to your office or do you make referrals out to where your contacts are? Trying to understand the one-stop shop framework and what is done in-house and what is delegated with referrals. Thank you.
Man, that's a great question. So the answer is both. So what we do is, to the extent possible, we bring resources to campus. And the example I can give you, the most impactful example I can give you, is that we have both VBA and VHA on campus. So that's Veteran Benefits Administration and Veteran Health Administration. So if a veteran's experiencing an issue with some of their benefits, they'll often put off dealing with it because it means I got to miss a day of class or I take a day off work and go sit in a waiting room to get moved to another waiting room to eventually talk to somebody and have a 5-minute conversation to fix something. And so we've noticed, or we previously noticed, that these issues that became crises became barriers to success. And a veteran would let something go until it became a decision of, do I continue with school and ignore this thing that I can't ignore anymore? Or now I've got to turn my full attention to whatever this thing is, and I've got to maybe stop out of school for a semester to deal with it. And so we noticed that was the main driver behind veterans taking longer to graduate. They were taking 6 to 8 years instead of 4 to 6 years. So we brought veteran benefits and we brought veteran health to the campus. So we have VA staff members sitting behind VA computers looking into VA systems that are housed in our office on campus. So now instead of this veteran having to decide if I'm going to have to take a day off work, take a day off class, they can stop by and see the vital counselor or the VSOC counselor in between classes. And the 5 minute conversation is a legitimate 5 minute conversation. Issue gets resolved and the student gets to continue on uninterrupted and doing whatever they're doing. And that's had the biggest impact, because when we look at the retention numbers from prior to having those on campus to now having them on campus, I think in the first year alone, our retention went up by 200 students. We retained 200 more veterans than we had the previous year, because we had those interventions in place. Now, clearly, we have other partners we bring on campus too. So we rotate through. We have the local VSOs from the county. They'll come through, and a whole lot of other nonprofits, Mission United. And the reason why we do that is not necessarily because we expect that every week a veteran's going to come in with a housing insecurity issue or a food insecurity issue. It's really to build trust. And so we try to bring the community partners in literally to be seen. So if a veteran sees John Doe or Jane Doe, and they know that this person deals in food insecurity or housing insecurity or whatever it is, but that veteran doesn't need that for 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, but someday they do need it, they're going to remember that person, and they're more likely to be willing to engage with that support if they're aware of that human being, than they would be if it would be a cold referral to an external partner. And so we're very intentional about providing that kind of contact, so that it's not just when you're in crisis and need something, but just making sure that there's a constant presence of all of our community partners rotating on campus, so that the military connected population sees them and understands that they are a part of our larger community. And so when they do, hopefully never need, but if they do need an intervention, they're far more likely to engage with it than to just not.
I have another question in the Q&A. It says, I'm curious if in the research there was any nuances found for graduate students and their needs, interests.
Oh yeah. That's one that we're, I don't want to air dirty laundry, but so with veterans and in particular graduate students, a lot of the graduate student vets that we get, their undergrad experience was very non-traditional, in that when they get into the grad program, that's probably the first time that they've set foot on a brick and mortar campus. So they a lot of times there's just a lot of access to education as an undergrad on active duty. I know I took advantage of that. But where the disconnect is that on the institution side, they look at somebody who's coming in with significant amount of credit as someone who knows how to go to college. Like, hey, you've got a degree, so clearly you know how things work because you got a degree, which means you've been through some things and some processes, and so you know what you need to know. And accordingly, things and resources that are available to incoming freshmen aren't necessarily part of the onboarding process for a graduate student. And in most cases, maybe that's appropriate. Maybe a grad student doesn't need to know things that a incoming freshman does, but veterans a little bit different, because yes, they're more experienced. Yes, they're more mature. Yes, they have, all these other qualities that employers like. And yes, they have taken classes before, but they need some of that baseline guidance that is typically offered in a freshman orientation class. And so looking at the data and all of the other information that we have, what we're currently trying to push is a reimagining of graduate student onboarding, which gives graduate students, and at this point, we're not specifically saying veterans, we're using veterans as the example, but we're just asking them to reconsider, reimagine veteran or grad student onboarding to be able to include elements from freshman orientation in case that graduate student wants that or needs that for whatever reason. And that's just something that we've uncovered. It's a gap that I guess nobody thought of because of that assumption out there that a grad student knows how to be a college student. And with vets, you just can't make that assumption, because that might have been an entirely non-traditional degree. And now they've got to figure out how to become a traditional student at an R1 university that's a brick and mortar campus. that has lines that you have to stand in and paperwork you got to fill out and things like that. And you don't have the support structure of like a squad leader or an education officer that's walking you through the process. So yes, that's short answer. Yes.
Our next question is, do you have an online program? What percentage of military are online students?
We have a couple of online programs. So we get this question a lot, and we have an online cyber program. And I think there's 3 or 4 other majors that you can do that are completely online, including a multidisciplinary program. The percentage is actually really high. So the highest concentration of veteran students using GI Bill is in our online cyber program. I'm guessing that could be for a lot of reasons. It could be because it's online. I mean, that's certainly a big factor, I'm sure. But when you think about where we're located geographically, we've got the NSA right down the street, and we know that NSA feeds us a lot of students. Those are the active duty students, though, because most of our TA students are coming from NSA, a lot of Air Force, a lot of Army. But as far as like having online options for entire degrees, not so many of those. But I can say that what we are working on, we're in the middle of this exercise, is we're trying to put interventions in place where students that are incoming have a mechanism to challenge for credit based on experiential learning. And so, we do review JST, Joint Service Transcripts. We do review Community College of the Air Force transcripts. But sometimes on the college side, someone doesn't understand what they're looking at. You could be looking at maybe a leadership school that somebody went to, corporal's course versus sergeant major's course on a JST. And on the university side, well, I don't know what that means, so I don't know how to evaluate that for credit. Other side of that coin, maybe we do know that that means something, but you have someone who's not military connected who doesn't understand the difference between the level of leadership that you might be coming in with as a 4 and out veteran that went to corporal's course or NCO course versus a 26-year veteran who's been through all kinds of leadership schools to include Sergeant Major's Academy or advanced schools. And so wanting to create mechanisms for the veteran to be able to challenge and say, well, I want to be able to get credit for this experience that I have. So we're working with each individual academic department because they're going to get to decide what that challenge looks like. It could either be an exam, a portfolio project, but the one thing that's going to happen is everyone is going to be required to have a mechanism for challenging for experiential credit. We just don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet because it's probably not going to be a cookie cutter approach. It's really going to depend on the department, the major, the nature of the academics, things like that. So maybe at some point in time in the future, we'll reconnect again and I'll be able to answer that question a little bit better than I was today, but it is something that we're moving towards. As far as the online stuff goes, I can tell you that we're exploring an articulation agreement with Joint Base San Antonio. And this isn't necessarily online, but it's something where we're thinking about all the schoolhouses in JBSA to include. I think they have 5 different kinds of medical schools, corpsman school, things like that, medics, EMTs, whatever. We're trying to explore an articulation agreement so that service members that are going through the JBSA schoolhouses have an opportunity to get credit from UTSA for whatever they're doing. And if it's a more involved school, that could be college credit. If it's something that's more like a micro credential, well, we have our PACE program here, and maybe they can get a micro credential through that. But the point is, giving them the opportunity to earn some form of college credit for a school they already have to go through for their required military training. And the idea there being that when they're leaving active duty, instead of having to worry so much about, how much credit can I get, or how much is my JST worth, or how much can I get for experiential credit, you can show up with a transcript. So you're not having to ask those questions. You can say, no, I've got 12 hours of this. Here's my transcript from UTSA. Even if they don't come to UTSA, they'll be able to put that transcript out there and shop that around so they have more options than they do now, which, frankly is the public schools have a hard time competing with the for-profits because the for-profits have a lot more flexibility in that, hey, what is it going to take? We'll give you 30 hours credit versus, a place like UTSA saying, well, we got to look at it in maybe 12 hours. I don't know. I think we'll be on equal footing if we can create a mechanism where they're getting this college credit organically, or if they're able to have these mechanisms to challenge for experiential credit. And one last thing, I know this wasn't part of the question. Experiential credit can happen at any time. So you might have somebody who starts here as a student veteran, and maybe they're in the Guard or Reserve, and as part of that obligation, they get promoted to E5, so they're going to go to the sergeant's course, and so now they have this experiential credit they didn't have when they started college. They'll still be able to challenge for that, and I think it's important for us to keep in mind that nothing's a one and done. That even though we're trying to be innovative and create these opportunities for veterans to have more flexibility in applying their military experience to their college transcripts, that can be a moving target because we have a significant population of folks that are still serving in some capacity once they leave active duty. So I'll leave that one there.
Well, we are at time. We thank you all so much for joining us today. Please feel free to contact us. Our contact information is there, both of our emails. If you'd like to reach out to both of us or individually, we welcome continuing this conversation and are happy to answer additional questions that y'all have.
Thank you both. That was such an amazing session. We appreciate your time, and thank you all of you who attended. And have a great rest of your day. Bye for now.